The massive arena buzzed with excitement as thousands of alien spectators filled the seats. High above in the luxury viewing boxes, Lord Zephyros watched the fights below with cold eyes. His blue crystalline skin caught the bright arena lights. As he sipped expensive wine from a golden cup, he was one of the most powerful nobles in the Velthran Empire, and everyone knew it. Zephyros loved these gladiator matches, not because he cared about the fighters, but because he enjoyed placing bets. The bigger the risk, the more excited he became. His friends always said he would bet on anything, and they were right. He had once wagered his entire fleet of ships on a single card game. Luckily for him, he won that time. Today felt different though. The crowd was laughing louder than usual, and Zephyros wanted to know why. He leaned forward in his chair and looked down at the arena floor. The announcer's voice boomed across the stadium, explaining the next fight. Ladies and gentlemen, our next battle will be truly entertaining. We have the undefeated champion Thorax, who has never lost a single fight. His opponent today is a human prisoner, who was captured during the recent colonial uprising. The crowd burst into laughter. Humans were considered the weakest species in the galaxy. They were small, fragile, and had no special abilities like other alien races. Most people thought they were barely worth keeping as prisoners. Zephyros smirked as he watched the human being pushed into the arena. The man looked terrible. His clothes were torn and dirty. There was a bandage wrapped around his head, and he was limping badly on his left leg. Fresh bruises covered his arms and face. The poor guy looked like he could barely stand up, let alone fight a trained warrior. This is going to be over in seconds, Zephyros said to his wife. Lady Celeste, who sat quietly beside him, she was a beautiful woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Unlike her husband, she always felt sorry for the prisoners who were forced to fight. That human looks hurt. Celeste said softly, This isn't fair at all. Zephyros rolled his eyes. His wife's soft heart always annoyed him. He believed that showing mercy was a sign of weakness. In his mind, the strong should rule over the weak, and that was the natural order of things. Fair? Zephyros laughed. Life isn't fair, my dear. That human chose to rebel against our empire. Now he faces the consequences. Celeste looked down at the injured fighter and felt her heart break. The human had a determined look in his eyes despite his obvious pain. There was something about him that reminded her of her younger brother, who had died in a mining accident years ago. I still think it's cruel, she whispered. Her words made Zephyros angry. He hated when his wife questioned his views, especially in front of his friends. The other nobles in the viewing box were watching their conversation with interest. Zephyros felt like he needed to prove his point and show everyone how powerful he was. You know what? Zephyros announced loudly, standing up from his chair. I'm so confident that this pathetic human will lose that I'm willing to make a special bet. His friends leaned forward, curious about what he would say next. Zephyros was famous for making crazy bets, but something in his voice suggested this would be different. I bet my wife's freedom on this fight, Zephyros declared with a cruel smile. If somehow, by some impossible miracle, that broken human manages to win, then Celeste can leave me forever. She'll be free to go wherever she wants. The viewing box fell silent. Even for Zephyros, this was shocking. In their society, noble women had very few rights once they were married. A wife belonged to her husband completely. For Zephyros to bet his wife's freedom was almost unheard of. And if the human loses? Asked one of his friends, though everyone already knew the answer. When the human loses. Zephyros corrected with confidence. My dear wife will become my complete property. No more noble rights, no more family connections, no more freedom to speak her mind. She'll be mine to do with as I please. Celeste felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to scream, to run away, to do something, but she knew better. Speaking against her husband in public would only make things worse for her. Instead, she gripped the railing of the viewing box so tightly her knuckles turned white. The other nobles whispered among themselves. Some looked shocked, others seemed amused by the entertainment. One of them called for an official from the arena's betting commission to record the wager. In the Velthran Empire, all public bets were legally binding. Once recorded, There was no way to take it back. Are you certain about this, Lord Zephyros? The betting official asked as he prepared his electronic tablet. This is a very unusual wager. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Zephyros replied. That human has no chance of winning. Look at him, down in the arena. The human fighter was being fitted with basic gladiator equipment. He received a damaged plasma sword that flickered weakly and some light armor that had seen better days. Meanwhile, his opponent Thorax looked like a walking mountain of muscle and armor. The alien champion stood 8 feet tall with natural armor plates covering his body and razor-sharp claws on his hands. The crowd cheered wildly for Thorax as he raised his twin energy blades above his head. The weapons hummed with deadly power, casting an airy blue glow across the arena floor. In comparison, the human looked like a child trying to fight a giant. The betting is now official. Announced the betting official. Lord Zephyros has wagered his wife's freedom on the human fighter losing this match. Word of the unusual bet spread quickly through the arena. People began placing their own side bets on how quickly the human would be defeated. Most predicted it would be over in less than a minute. Celeste stared down at the human fighter, and for the first time in years, she found herself praying. She didn't even know this man's name, but somehow his victory had become the most important thing in her world. If he could somehow win, she would be free from her cruel husband forever. The arena announcer raised his voice to begin the countdown. Fighters, prepare for battle. This match will begin in 10 seconds. Zephyros leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. He was already thinking about how he would celebrate his wife's complete submission after the fight. In his mind, there was absolutely no way he could lose this bet. But as the countdown reached 0 and the battle horn sounded, something unexpected happened. Instead of charging forward recklessly, the human fighter stepped back and began studying his opponent carefully. His eyes moved quickly, analyzing Thorax's movements and looking for weaknesses. For the first time since making his bet, Zephyros felt a tiny flutter of uncertainty in his stomach, but he quickly pushed the feeling away. After all, what could one injured human possibly do against the greatest champion in the galaxy? The battle horn echoed through the massive arena as the human fighter took his first careful steps onto the sandy floor. His name was David Chen, though the crowd didn't care to know it. To them, he was just another prisoner about to meet his end. But David had something most people couldn't see, the trained mind of a former colonial marine. The crowd's laughter grew louder as they watched him limp across the arena. His left leg dragged slightly behind him, and the bandages around his ribs were already showing spots of red. 3 months of imprisonment had left him weak and battered, but his dark eyes still burned with determination. Thorax, the champion, strutted around the arena like he owned it, and in many ways, he did. For 5 years, no fighter had even come close to defeating him. His thick, armored skin could stop most weapons, and his claws could slice through metal. The alien crowd chanted his name as he flexed his massive muscles. Thorax. 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 The champion loved the attention. He raised his twin energy blades high above his head, and they hummed with deadly power. Each blade was 3 feet long and could cut through almost anything. He had used them to end dozens of lives in this very arena. David received his equipment from a bored-looking guard. The plasma sword felt heavy in his hands, and its energy field flickered like a dying light bulb. The armor they gave him was scratched and dented, clearly used by many fighters before him. Most of those fighters were probably dead now. Up in the luxury viewing box, Lord Zephyros watched with growing amusement. His wife Celeste sat frozen beside him, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her fingers hurt. She couldn't look away from the human fighter, even though watching felt like torture. This is almost too easy, Zephyros told his friends. I should have bet something more valuable than just my wife's freedom. His friends laughed, but Celeste felt sick to her stomach. Her entire future depended on this injured man somehow performing. A miracle. She had never felt so helpless in her entire life. Down in the arena, the referee, a tall blue alien with 4 arms, stepped between the two fighters. His voice boomed across the stadium through hidden speakers. The rules are simple. Fight until one surrenders or cannot continue. The winner lives, the loser, well, you know the rest. Thorax grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. He had never allowed an opponent to surrender. In his mind, showing mercy was weakness. And weakness had no place in the arena. The referee raised one of his arms high in the air. Let the battle begin. The crowd erupted in cheers as Thorax immediately charged forward with incredible speed. His heavy footsteps shook the ground as he rushed toward David with both energy blades ready to strike. Most fighters would have panicked and tried to run, but David did something unexpected. He stood perfectly still at the last possible second. Just as Thorax's blades were about to reach him, David rolled to the side. The champion's momentum carried him forward, and his blades struck only empty air. The crowd gasped in surprise. David used those few seconds to study his opponent more carefully. His military training had taught him that every enemy had weaknesses, no matter how strong they appeared. He noticed that Thorax was fast in a straight line, but turned slowly. The champion's armor was thick everywhere except around his joints. Thorax spun around, angry that his first attack had missed. Lucky move, little human. It won't happen again. This time, Thorax approached more carefully. He swung his right blade in a wide arc, forcing David to jump backward. Then he followed up with his left blade, trying to trap the human in the corner of the arena. David barely managed to block the attack with his flickering plasma sword. The impact sent painful vibrations up his arms, and he realized his weapon wouldn't last long against such powerful strikes. He needed a different strategy. While blocking another attack, David noticed something interesting about the arena floor. There were small metal panels scattered around, probably covering old machinery from when the arena was first built. Some of them had tiny lights blinking underneath. His engineer's mind immediately started working. The crowd was getting more excited now. They had expected the fight to be over quickly, but the human was lasting longer than anyone thought possible. Some aliens in the cheaper seats even started cheering for the underdog, though they would never admit it if asked. Thorax grew frustrated as his attacks kept missing their target. He was used to opponents who fought with brute force, not ones who used their brains. David's constant movement and careful timing were throwing off his rhythm. Stop running and fight like a warrior, Thorax roared. But David ignored the insult. He had learned long ago that pride could get you killed in battle. Instead, he kept moving, kept studying, and kept looking for opportunities. He noticed that one of the metal panels was larger than the others and had more lights underneath it. During the next exchange, David deliberately led Thorax toward that panel. When the champion raised both blades for a devastating overhead strike, David rolled away at the last second. Thorax's blades struck the metal panel with tremendous force. Sparks flew everywhere as the panel cracked open, revealing old energy conduits underneath. Suddenly, a section of the arena floor began to glow with unstable energy. Thorax jumped back in surprise, giving David his first real opening. The human fighter struck quickly, aiming for a gap in Thorax's armor near his shoulder. His plasma sword connected, leaving a small but visible wound. It wasn't deep, but it was enough to draw a few drops of the champion's blue blood. The arena fell silent for a moment. No one could remember the last time Thorax had been injured in a fight. The champion looked down at his wound in shock, then back at David with newfound respect and anger. "You'll pay for that, human," Thorax growled, but there was less confidence in his voice now. Up in the viewing box, Zephyros had stopped smiling. His friends were no longer making jokes about easy victories. For the first time since placing his bet, doubt crept into the Lord's mind. Celeste, meanwhile, felt a spark of hope growing in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this remarkable human could actually win. The sight of his own blue blood dripping onto the arena's sand changed everything for Thorax. For 5 long years, he had been untouchable. No blade had ever pierced his armor. No opponent had ever made him bleed. Now this broken human had done what hundreds of trained warriors could not. David wiped sweat from his forehead and took a deep breath. His injured leg was screaming with pain, and his ribs felt like they were on fire. but for the first time since entering this nightmare arena, he felt like he might actually have a chance. The key was using his brain instead of trying to match the champion's raw strength. The crowd was buzzing with excitement now. What had started as a joke was turning into the most interesting fight they had seen in months. Some aliens were even standing up in their seats to get a better view. The betting odds were starting to shift, though most people still expected Thorax to win eventually. Thorax touched his wounded shoulder and stared at the blood on his fingers. His pride was hurt more than his body. He had been embarrassed in front of thousands of spectators, and that was something he could never forgive. Lucky shot. Thorax snarled, but his voice didn't sound as confident as before. Let's see you try that again. David said nothing. He had learned in the military that talking during a fight was just a waste of energy. Instead, he kept moving, staying light on his feet despite his injuries. He circled around the champion, always keeping some distance between them. While moving, David's eyes swept across the arena floor. His engineer training had taught him to notice details that others missed. The old building had been constructed centuries ago, and much of the original machinery was still hidden beneath the modern surface. He could see more of those metal panels, with blinking lights underneath. Thorax charged again, this time swinging both energy blades in a complex pattern that would have cut most opponents to pieces. But David had been watching the champion's moves carefully. Thorax was incredibly strong and fast, but he used the same attack combinations over and over again. Like many undefeated fighters, he had become predictable. David ducked under the first blade, rolled away from the second, and then did something that shocked everyone in the arena. Instead of running away, he moved closer to Thorax. The champion was so surprised that he hesitated for a split second, and that was all the opening David needed. The human fighter grabbed a handful of sand from the arena floor and threw it directly into Thorax's eyes. It was a dirty trick, but David was fighting for his life, not trying to win style points. The champion roared in anger and pain, swinging his blades wildly while trying to clear his vision. While Thorax was blinded, David ran toward another one of those metal panels. This one was near the arena wall and had a small control device sticking out of the sand. David kicked the device as hard as he could with his good leg. Suddenly, a section of the arena wall began to move. Ancient machinery rumbled to life, and metal spikes started extending from hidden slots in the walls. The arena's original designers had built these features to make fights more entertaining, but they hadn't been used in decades. The crowd gasped as they realized what was happening. The human wasn't just fighting Thorax anymore. He was turning the entire arena into his ally. Even some of the alien nobles in the luxury boxes leaned forward with genuine interest. Thorax finally cleared the sand from his eyes, but now he faced a completely different situation. Sharp metal spikes jutted out from the walls around him, and sections of the floor were glowing with unstable energy. The safe fighting space had been cut in half. What kind of trickery is this? Thorax demanded, but he sounded more worried than angry now. David didn't answer. He was too busy studying the arena's new layout and planning his next move. The spikes and energy fields had created a maze-like environment that favored speed and intelligence over raw power. For the first time since the fight began, David had the advantage. The champion tried to charge again, but the narrow pathways between the spikes forced him to move more slowly. His massive size, which had been such an advantage in open combat, now worked against him. David could slip through gaps that Thorax couldn't fit through. Up in the viewing box, Lord Zephyros was no longer sitting back casually. He was leaning forward in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. Sweat beaded on his blue forehead despite the cool air conditioning. This is impossible, he muttered to himself. Humans aren't supposed to be this clever. His wife Celeste was holding her breath every time David avoided an attack or activated another piece of arena machinery. Her heart raced with hope. She found herself silently cheering for the brave human who might just give her the freedom she had dreamed of for years. The other nobles in the viewing box were equally amazed. They had never seen anything like this fight. Some were already discussing how they would tell this story to their friends. assuming anyone would believe it. Down in the arena, David activated another control device, and more changes rippled through the fighting space. Gravity fields shifted, making some areas lighter and others heavier. Energy barriers flickered to life, dividing the arena into separate sections. Thorax was getting desperate now. The comfortable, predictable arena he knew so well had become a confusing maze of dangers and obstacles. Worse yet, the human seemed to understand how everything worked while he was stumbling around like a lost child. "Fight me properly," Thorax screamed. "Stop hiding behind these machines." But David had no intention of giving up his newfound advantages. This wasn't about honor or fair play. This was about survival. And if using the arena's own systems against the champion was what it took to win, then that's exactly what he would do. The tide of battle had truly turned. What had started as certain death for the human was becoming a masterclass in tactical thinking and adaptation. The question now wasn't whether David could hurt Thorax, but whether the mighty champion could adapt quickly enough to survive. The arena had become a deadly puzzle, and David Chen was the only one who understood how to solve it. 2 hours had passed since the fight began, and both warriors were bleeding and exhausted. But while Thorax grew more frustrated with each passing minute, David seemed to gain strength from his own cleverness. The champion's once perfect armor now showed multiple scratches and dents. David had managed to land several more hits by using the arena's shifting layout to his advantage. Each one was small, but they were adding up. More importantly, they were proving to everyone watching that the mighty Thorax was not invincible after all. David's own condition was far from perfect. His injured leg was barely holding him up, and blood seeped through his bandages. Every breath sent sharp pains through his damaged ribs, but his mind remained sharp and focused. He had studied Thorax's fighting patterns for 2 full hours now, and he was beginning to see something the champion couldn't see himself. Thorax was getting sloppy. The alien warrior had never been in a fight that lasted this long. His previous battles had all ended within minutes, with his opponents either dead or surrendering quickly. He didn't know how to pace himself for a marathon battle, and his movements were becoming wilder and less controlled. Up in the luxury viewing box, Lord Zephyros was practically vibrating with nervous energy. His confident smile had disappeared completely, replaced by a look of growing panic. His friends had stopped making jokes about easy victories. Some of them were even placing side bets on the human, though they tried to hide it from Zephyros. "This can't be happening," Zephyros whispered to himself. "Humans are supposed to be weak. They're supposed to give up easily." His wife Celeste was experiencing the opposite emotion for the first time in years. She felt genuine hope burning in her chest. Every time David avoided death by inches, she wanted to cheer. Every clever trick he used against the champion made her believe that maybe, just maybe, her nightmare marriage might finally end. The crowd's energy had completely shifted now. What had started as bloodthirsty entertainment had become something much more meaningful. Thousands of aliens were watching a member of the weakest species in the galaxy prove that intelligence and determination could overcome raw power. Some of them were starting to question their own beliefs about strength and superiority. Down in the arena, David was preparing for his final gambit. He had noticed something about the arena's central platform that no one else had seen. There was a large control panel hidden beneath a removable section of flooring, and if his engineering knowledge was correct, it controlled the arena's main gravity systems. But to reach it, he would have to get past Thorax one more time, and the champion, despite his exhaustion, was still incredibly dangerous. Thorax sensed that something was about to happen. The human had been moving with more purpose over the last few minutes, as if he was building up to something big. The champion decided he couldn't wait any longer. It was time to end this fight once and for all. "Enough games," Thorax roared. "I'll crush you with one final attack." The champion raised both of his energy blades high above his head and began charging toward David with everything he had left. His heavy footsteps shook the entire arena as he built up momentum. This wasn't a careful, tactical strike. This was pure desperation and rage turned into a weapon. David waited until the last possible moment, watching Thorax's approach with calculating eyes. The champion was moving faster than he had all day, but he was also completely committed to his attack. There would be no way for him to change direction or stop once he launched himself into the air. Just as Thorax leaped forward for his crushing blow, David rolled to the side and slammed his fist down on the hidden control panel, the arena's main gravity system. Responded instantly, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of changing the gravity in the fighting area, David had activated the emergency reverse gravity system, designed to lift heavy equipment out of the arena. Suddenly, Thorax found himself flying upward instead of downward, his own momentum working against him. The champion crashed into the arena's energy barrier ceiling with tremendous force. The impact was so hard that several of his armor plates cracked, and both of his energy blades went flying in different directions. When he finally fell back to the arena floor, he landed hard on his back with a sickening thud. The entire stadium fell silent. Even the announcers seemed too shocked to speak. Thorax, the undefeated champion who had never even been knocked down before, was lying motionless on the sandy floor. David stood over his fallen opponent, his own flickering plasma sword pointed at Thorax's throat. According to arena rules, the champion could either surrender or continue fighting. But with his weapons gone and his armor cracked, continuing would mean certain death. For a long moment, nobody moved. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Up in the viewing box, Zephyros looked like he was about to be sick. His face had gone completely pale, and his hands were shaking. Thorax opened his eyes and looked up at the human standing above him. For the first time in his career, he saw something in an opponent's face that he had never seen before. Not hatred or fear, but respect. This human had beaten him fairly, using nothing but intelligence and determination. "I surrender," Thorax said quietly, his voice barely audible in the massive arena. The words seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the crowd. Suddenly, the stadium exploded with noise. Some aliens were cheering, others were booing, and many were simply shouting. In disbelief, the impossible had happened. A broken, injured human had defeated the greatest champion in the galaxy. David lowered his weapon and stepped back. He had won, but he felt no joy in his victory. He was just grateful to be alive. As the reality of what had happened began to sink in, he looked up at the luxury viewing boxes and wondered what would happen to him now. In the noble section, Lord Zephyros sat frozen in his chair, staring down at the arena in complete shock. His arrogant bet had just cost him everything he valued most, his power over his wife. The legally binding wager meant that Celeste was now free to leave him, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. The days following David Chen's impossible victory changed everything in ways no one could have predicted. News of the humans' triumph spread across the entire Velthran Empire like wildfire. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting footage of the fight. The story was too incredible for most people to believe at first. David found himself moved from the prisoner cells to a luxury medical facility, reserved for successful gladiators. Alien doctors worked around the clock to heal his injuries, using advanced technology that humans could only dream of. For the first time in months, he slept in a real bed and ate proper food. But the most shocking changes were happening in the political world. Lord Zephyrus' humiliation had turned him into a laughingstock among the noble class. His enemies, who had feared him for years, suddenly saw an opportunity to bring him down completely. The first blow came from his business partners. Within a week of the fight, 3 major companies canceled their contracts with him. They claimed it was due to changing market conditions, but everyone knew the real reason. No one wanted to be associated with the Lord who had been outsmarted by a human prisoner. Then came the financial problems. Zephyros had always been a big spender, using his wife's family money to fund his gambling habits and expensive lifestyle. But now that Celeste was legally free to leave him, her family's support dried up overnight. They had never liked Zephyros anyway, and his public humiliation gave them the perfect excuse to cut all ties. Within 2 weeks, Zephyros went from being one of the most powerful nobles in the empire to being a social outcast with mounting debts. His grand mansion was put up for sale, and his collection of expensive ships was seized by creditors. The man who had once bragged about betting everything was learning what it really meant to lose it all. Meanwhile, Lady Celeste was experiencing freedom for the first time in her adult life. She had left Zephyros immediately after the fight, taking only her personal belongings and the dowry money that legally belonged to her. Instead of disappearing into hiding as many people expected, she did something that surprised everyone. She became an activist, using her noble status and family connections. Celeste began working to reform the gladiator system. She argued that forcing prisoners to fight to the death was barbaric and outdated. Her speeches at political gatherings drew huge crowds, and many nobles who had previously ignored such issues began to listen. If one injured human can defeat our greatest champion through intelligence and determination, she would say, then perhaps we need to reconsider our beliefs about strength and superiority. Her work wasn't easy. Many aliens still believe that humans and other weaker species deserve their treatment, but Celeste's noble birth and her dramatic personal story gave her words special power. She couldn't be easily dismissed as just another bleeding heart activist. David, meanwhile, was facing his own difficult choices. His victory had made him more than just a free man. It had made him a symbol. Representatives from the human colonial resistance contacted him secretly, offering him a chance to use his fame to help their cause. You've proven that humans can be just as clever and determined as any alien species, their leader told him during a secret meeting. Your story gives hope to millions of our people across the galaxy. We need someone like you to help us fight for better treatment. The offer was tempting, but David was tired of fighting. All he really wanted was to return to Earth and see his family again. He had been reported dead months ago, and he knew his parents and sister probably thought they would never see him again. But as he learned more about the conditions facing humans throughout the Empire, David realized he couldn't just walk away. His victory had given him a platform that very few humans ever got. If he stayed quiet and did nothing, he would be wasting an opportunity to help millions of people. After much consideration, David decided to use his newfound celebrity status carefully. He began giving interviews to news networks, speaking about the need for better treatment of prisoners and respect for all species. He was careful never to call for violent rebellion, knowing that would only make things worse for humans everywhere. His message was simple but powerful. Judge people by their actions, not by their species. Every being in this galaxy deserves a chance to prove their worth. The interviews made David even more famous, and his words began to influence public opinion. Some aliens started questioning whether the Empire's treatment of humans and other inferior species was really justified. It wasn't a revolution, but it was the beginning of real change. 6 months after the fight, an unexpected meeting took place in a quiet cafe on the capital planet. David and Celeste had arranged to meet privately, away from the media attention that followed both of them everywhere. I never got the chance to properly thank you, Celeste said as they sat across from each other at a small table. You gave me something I thought I would never have again, freedom. David smiled and shook his head. I was just trying to survive. I had no idea about your husband's bet until after the fight was over. Maybe that's what made it so powerful, Celeste replied. You weren't fighting for me or for any grand cause. You were just refusing to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. That's exactly the kind of spirit that our galaxy needs more of. They talked for hours about their plans for the future. Celeste was working on new laws that would give prisoners more rights and better treatment. David was planning to travel to human colonies throughout the Empire, spreading his message of hope and determination. As they prepared to leave, Celeste asked one final question. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had lost that fight? David thought for a moment before answering. I try not to think about it too much, but I do know one thing. Your husband's arrogance would have continued to hurt people. If someone hadn't stopped him, maybe that fight was always meant to happen. As they parted ways, both of them felt hopeful about the future. Change was coming to the Velthran Empire, slowly but surely. And it had all started with one injured human who refused to give up, and one cruel bet that backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Lord Zephyros, now living in a small apartment and working as a low-level clerk to pay his debts, sometimes watched footage of that fateful fight. He would stare at the screen and wonder how everything had gone so wrong. His arrogance had cost him his wealth, his status, his wife, and his future. The bet that was supposed to prove his superiority had instead proven that even the most powerful people could fall when they underestimated others. The story became a legend that spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring others to never give up hope, no matter how impossible their situations seemed.